The text came in at 4:43 p.m., right as Marion was pulling the apple tart from the oven, golden and bubbling, the scent of cinnamon curling around her like a memory she hadn't dared to hope for. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Everyone's excited. Bring your magic touch like always," Trent had written, followed by a little apple emoji and a thumbs up. And just like that, her heart gave him permission again. She hadn't been invited to anything in almost a year, not since the wedding when she was told to stay in the back because the lighting up front wasn't flattering. But this felt different. Family dinner. No big occasion, just them. He even called it your night on the phone yesterday. "Nothing fancy, Mom. Just come, make that tart of yours. Hang out. We miss you." She had played that voicemail back 3 times, not because she doubted it, but because she wanted to believe it. Marion's kitchen smelled like love. Not the Instagram kind, not roses and matching aprons, but the kind made of butter and patience and hands that ached from doing everything the long way. She'd peeled the apples one by one, used real butter, not the margarine Mara always insisted on. Her tart dish, the one with the small chip on the rim that only she noticed, sat on the cooling rack like an offering. And for once, Marion let herself be excited. Trent wanted her there. He said it himself. She ironed her good blouse, the pale blue one with the pearl buttons, not for them, but for herself, because she wanted to feel like someone who still mattered, not just the woman who got passed around for holidays like a used casserole dish. At the grocery store, she picked up a bottle of the spiced cider Trent used to love when he was a boy. She'd warmed it on the stove, added a cinnamon stick like old times. When she packed everything in the back seat, she even brought cloth napkins. They didn't ask for those. But Marion always did things a little extra, just in case it mattered. Driving to the house took 40 minutes, long enough for her to second-guess herself, then stop, then second-guess again. She wondered what shoes Mara would be wearing, wondered if the grandkids would be there, wondered if her presence would make the room warmer or colder, but Trent said he wanted her there, and that was enough. The house was new, sleek and enormous, all sharp corners and floor-to-ceiling windows. It didn't look lived in, not really. More like a showroom where someone might stand holding a glass of water, pretending to smile. She pulled into the drive and sat there a moment, adjusted her collar in the mirror, smoothed her hair. For a moment, she thought about turning back, but then she looked at the tart. Still warm, still whole. She'd come this far. The door opened before she could knock. Mara, tall, angular, holding a phone. She blinked when she saw Marion. "Oh, you really did make it." Not hi, not come in, just surprise. Like Marion had crossed some invisible line by believing she was invited. "I brought the tart," Marion said softly. Mara stepped aside. "Everyone's in the dining room." The kitchen was blinding white, a stark contrast to the deep woods of Marion's home. Every surface gleamed. No one looked up when she walked in, at least not right away. Trent was laughing about something, his hand around a wine glass. The table was already set, 8 places, all coordinated. Candles, gold-rimmed plates, but one end of the table was empty, or at least it should have been. Instead of a chair, there was a silver trash can, a real one, metal, lid off, half full, crumpled napkins inside, a takeout cup, a paper plate with a smear of something red. Taped to the front in loopy cursive, Marion. Laughter rolled across the room. Mara giggled. "It's just a joke." Trent, already halfway through a drink, added, "Come on, Mom, lighten up." Toby thought of it. Toby, the grandson who used to cry when he scraped his knee and only wanted her hugs, looked away. Marion stood still. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. She looked at the tart in her hands, still warm, still perfect. She placed it gently on the edge of the counter. "I hope you enjoy it," she said. Then she turned and walked out. No one followed her. Driving home, she didn't cry. The tart dish still carried the scent of cinnamon and hope. But something in her, the part that always stayed quiet, always excused, always forgave, had gone very still. And somewhere between the highway and her driveway, she realized this wasn't just another awkward moment to swallow. It was the start of something else. Not revenge in the loud movie sense, but something quieter. a revenge story of a different kind, the kind where the mother doesn't scream. She simply decides. Tonight, Marion didn't feel broken, she felt done. And sometimes that's where everything truly begins. Marion didn't remember the drive home, not really. The roads blurred. The streetlights flickered past like questions she didn't want to answer. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel, but inside, something had unlatched. The kind of brake that didn't make noise, just space. She pulled into her driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. Her house, though older, felt kinder. The porch light she'd forgotten to replace was still flickering, and the begonias she'd planted last spring were drooping from neglect. But at least everything there still knew her name. She carried the empty feeling inside, all the way through the front door, past the worn couch, and into the kitchen. The tart dish was still in the back seat. She left it there. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. She could walk through that house blindfolded and still avoid every squeaky floorboard. The kettle sat on the stove, the kind Trent once said made her house smell like old people. She'd thrown out that comment back then, or at least tried to. Now it came back sharper. She sat down at the kitchen table and let her eyes adjust to the dark. The table was scratched, warped from years of hot plates and missed coasters. But it was hers. James had sanded it himself the year after their anniversary. Marion ran her fingers along one of the deep grooves, and it felt like something truer than anything said that night at Trent's table. Lighten up. That's what he'd said, as if what she felt was optional. As if pain could be willed away, so long as everyone else agreed to laugh. She'd heard it before, in different words. You're too sensitive. You always make things bigger than they are. It's just how Mara jokes. Only now, there wasn't enough patience left to smooth over what she'd finally admitted to herself. They had stopped seeing her a long time ago. Maybe you felt that too. If you're watching this right now and someone in your life has slowly made you invisible, let me ask, have you ever been in a room full of people who love to remind you they're family while quietly treating you like furniture? Because that's what this chapter feels like. And sometimes, knowing you're not alone in it is the first step out. Marion stood up slowly, her knees cracked. She used to joke about that. James would offer a mock bow every time she got off the couch, saying, "The Queen rise, No one bowed for her now. She walked into the living room and picked up the family photo from the mantel. It was from 5 years ago, Trent's birthday. Everyone had bright smiles, wine glasses raised, but her smile in the picture looked just slightly off, too tight, like someone trying to stay polite when she wasn't sure if she belonged there. She put the frame down. In the hallway closet, behind a stack of winter coats, was a small fireproof box. She'd kept it for emergencies. Birth certificates, old report cards, the deed to the house. She brought it to the kitchen and opened it on the table. There it was, the stock certificate from the company where she'd worked for 27 years. She'd sold it 12 years ago, every last share. $120,000. She didn't tell anyone, not even her sisters. Trent had needed money to buy into a restaurant group, and the bank wouldn't give him the full amount. Marion had said yes without hesitation. That's what mothers do, she thought back then. That's what mothers do. She ran her thumb along the edge of the envelope and felt something twist inside her. Not anger, not regret, something slower, like soil cracking after too many seasons of drought. A shift, not a storm. She reached behind her and took down her old notepad, the one she kept for grocery lists. On the first line, she wrote in capital letters, "Things I gave without being asked." And under it, Trent's first car down payment, $3,000. Mara's dental surgery when insurance wouldn't cover it, $4,200. Toby's summer robotics camp, $1,800. Business loan guarantee, $15,000. Stock liquidation, $120,000. 37 unpaid babysitting nights. She paused, pen hovering over the paper, then added, "My chair at the table." Marion leaned back in her chair. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to be gracious. She wasn't shrinking herself to keep things peaceful. She was just present. And for once, that felt enough. She folded the list and slipped it into an envelope, marked it with one word: history. Then she poured herself a cup of cold cider, still spiced from earlier, took a slow sip, and let the silence fill the house like a balm instead of a burden. Tomorrow she would call the lawyer, but tonight she would sit in the home she had built, the life she had watered, and finally name the truth no one else dared say. They didn't forget what she gave. They just thought she'd never stop giving. The morning after the dinner, Marian woke earlier than usual, not because of a dream, but because of the weight in her chest. Not a sharp pain, not something urgent, just heavy. The kind of weight that doesn't scream. It just settles and stays. She sat on the edge of her bed, feet on the floor, fingers gripping the blanket. For a long time, she didn't move. Outside, birds chirped. The neighbor's dog barked twice and a car started down the block. Life went on. Of course it did. She walked barefoot to the kitchen, the floor cool against her soles. She didn't bother with breakfast, just tea, no honey. She usually added a touch, just the way James liked it. But James was gone, and Trent never noticed, and she didn't want sweetness that morning. The kitchen table still had her envelope from the night before, the one labeled history. She didn't touch it. Not yet. She opened the hallway closet and pulled down an old cardboard box labeled keepsakes. It had been untouched for years. Inside were photo albums, letters, James's old army medals, a birthday card Trent made her in second grade. The crayon was faded, but it still read, "You're the best mom. I love you forever." She held the card in her hand for a long time, not crying, just still. Marian moved through the house like someone walking through a museum, each room full of artifacts from a life she had built, a life that had slowly turned its back to her. The chair where she'd sat to read to Trent, the hallway mirror where Mara once said, "You should get rid of that thing, it's depressing." The kitchen counter Trent leaned on the day he told her he didn't need advice from someone who never left her hometown. She opened the bottom drawer of her dresser and pulled out a small velvet box. James's watch was still inside. It had been 20 years, and somehow it still worked. She remembered how he used to hum Sinatra under his breath while fixing shelves, how he'd place a hand on her lower back just because, how he never once, in all their years together, made her feel invisible. She missed being seen. By noon, Marian had started cleaning. Not the kind of cleaning that makes things sparkle. The kind where every object becomes a question. Do I need this? Do I want this? Or have I been keeping it out of guilt? She started in the pantry, tossed expired spices, stale cereal, pasta boxes she hadn't used in years. Then the closet, coats that no longer fit, shoes with soles too worn, a pink cardigan Mara had gifted her 2 Christmases ago that still had the tag on it. She folded it carefully and placed it in a donation bag. Then she paused and went back to her closet. She reached to the back corner and pulled out a small wooden box. It held the deed to the land in Kansas, the family land as Trent always called it. Generations of Fields had lived there, worked it, passed it down. Trent once said he'd build a vacation house on it someday. "When I have time to care," he said with a laugh, but he never cared. Not about the land, not about her. He just assumed it would be his. Marian set the box on the kitchen table next to the envelope labeled history. She looked at them both for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. Her lawyer's name was Harold. They hadn't spoken in years, but he still answered like she'd just called him last week. "Marian," he said warmly. "It's been a while. I need to update my will," she said simply. A pause. "Understood. I also want to change my financial power of attorney, remove Trent." "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "I'm not angry, I'm just finished." They scheduled an appointment for the following week. She hung up the phone and walked to the living room, sat down in the chair James used to nap in. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to sit without doing anything. No laundry, no dishes, no errands, just breathing. There was a stillness in the house, not hollow, not lonely, just honest, like the air no longer had to pretend. She looked around. So much of her life had been built around other people's needs, other people's comfort. She'd made herself smaller to fit in their expectations, but no more. She reached for her notebook again and wrote one more line beneath her list. They never thought I'd stop giving. That was their mistake. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere down the block, a child was laughing. Marian closed the notebook, folded the cardigan, and placed it by the door. There was still kindness in her, but not for those who treated it like trash. From now on, anything she gave would be on her own terms, and that, she realized, was the beginning of something entirely new. Marian didn't wait. Not this time. The morning after she folded the cardigan and dropped the donation bag at the front door, she made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the land deed sitting beside her grocery notepad. The crisp paper looked out of place next to the handwritten list of things I gave without being asked. But maybe they belonged together, after all. Both were records of what had been taken for granted. She pulled her phone closer, dialed slowly. Her lawyer's number hadn't changed. Harold answered on the second ring. "Marian," he said warmly, "it's been years." "Too many," she replied, "but I need to revise my will." His voice straightened. "Understood." "And," she added, "I want Trent removed from financial power of attorney." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "I'm not angry," she said, "but I'm done pretending his name means loyalty." Another pause, longer this time. "Let's schedule a time to go over the documents," he said. "Sooner the better?" "Sooner," she confirmed. When the call ended, Marian didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel triumphant. She just felt still, like the wind had finally stopped pushing her from behind, and now she had to decide where to go next. She picked up the land deed again. Kansas, 6.4 acres. Dry, quiet land passed down from her grandfather. It had never been glamorous, just long grass, wild sunflowers, and a small cemetery on the back edge with 3 generations buried beneath modest stones. Trent always spoke of it like a trophy. "One day I'll build out there," he'd said once, swirling a glass of wine. "Maybe a cabin with a hot tub, something rustic." He never asked her how she felt about it. He just assumed it would be his. Marian pulled a folder from the cabinet under the sink. Inside were old letters, birthday cards from nieces, notes from church friends, and one thick envelope from Ella. She was a second cousin once removed, just a teenager when she started writing to Marian from her college dorm. Every letter ended with the same sentence. "Thank you for being the only person who never asked me to be more than myself." Ella had visited a few summers ago, helped Marian weed the backyard, made lemonade, and asked more questions than any of Marian's own family had in years. Real questions. "What's your favorite flower? Do you miss Kansas? What's something you never got to do?" Marian had almost cried when she asked that last one. Maybe this land deserved someone like that. By noon, Marian called Harold back. "I want to transfer ownership of the Kansas property," she said. "To whom?" he asked. "Ella Sims." There was a pause again, but this time it wasn't surprise. It was quiet agreement. "Do you want her to know yet?" "No," Marian said. "Let her find out the right way." After lunch, simple toast and eggs, she sat at her desk and wrote a letter. Not to Trent, not yet. This one was for herself. The kind of letter no one else might ever read. She folded it into a fresh envelope and tucked it behind the Kansas deed, sealing them together with a ribbon. She walked through the house again that afternoon, but this time not as a stranger. She wasn't lost inside it anymore. She was taking stock. The good dishes could go. She hadn't used them since James passed. The guest bed frame could be donated. The quilts could stay. In the hall closet, she found a shoebox labeled for Trent. It held baby photos, a lock of his first haircut, his spelling bee ribbon from 3rd grade, and a letter she'd written him after he graduated college. She hadn't meant for it to feel like goodbye when she boxed it all up, but now it kind of did. She placed the box by the front door, not to send, not to throw away, just to remind herself. She didn't have to carry it anymore. That evening, she lit a candle and sat on the porch. The wind was soft, brushing her skin like a hand she used to know. She thought of James, of how he would have handled that dinner. He would have waited until the guests left, then looked Trent in the eye and said something that didn't need volume to cut deep. James never raised his voice. He just raised the truth. "You waited too long," she whispered to the night, "but I think you'd be proud." Inside, the phone rang once, then again. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Not tonight. That night, she slept with the window open. The breeze carried in the scent of dry leaves and something else. Maybe freedom, or maybe just finally recognizing her own breath. For years, Marion had given without keeping count. Now, she wasn't counting either. She was choosing, and that made all the difference. Marion didn't tell anyone she was taking the train. She packed light. A canvas bag, 2 dresses, a sweater, and the worn paperback James gave her for their 18th anniversary. The one with his little note inside, "To my compass, wherever you go, may you always know who you are." She didn't bring her phone charger. The ride to Kansas took over 10 hours, but it passed like breath. The rhythmic hum of the tracks, the soft sway of the car, the hushed conversations of strangers, it all reminded her that the world was still turning, with or without her family's approval. That was comforting in a strange way. When she arrived in the small town that bordered the family land, she walked the last mile instead of calling a cab. The sun was low, casting the golden light she remembered from childhood summers. Dust clung to her shoes. Grass brushed her calves. Her knees ached, but it felt like something earned. The gate hadn't changed, still creaky, still leaning just slightly left. She pushed it open and stepped onto the land her father used to call the soul of us. It had been years since she'd been there. The house was gone, long since torn down, but the field still breathed with memory. The wild sunflowers nodded in the breeze. The little cemetery in the back where her parents rested was still tidy. Someone had kept it clean. Maybe one of the neighbors, or maybe Ella. She sat under the lone tree by the old well and let the quiet settle in her bones. There was no performance here, no expectations, just her, the earth, and the decision she'd made without asking permission. She stayed a week. Didn't tell anyone where she was. She cooked simple meals, read on the porch of a rented cabin, wrote letters she never intended to send. She started sketching again, nothing fancy, just outlines of trees, birds, that broken gate. It was like remembering a language she hadn't spoken in decades. One morning, she walked into the town library and asked if they needed volunteers. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Janine, blinked and said, "You mean for the summer reading program?" Marion smiled. "Or whatever you need." By the end of the week, she was helping kids pick out books, reading aloud, laughing. No one asked her what she did before. No one expected her to shrink. And in that space, away from the heavy silences of home, away from being Trent's mother or the woman who always brings dessert, she felt something surprising. She felt like herself. Back at her cabin one night, she opened her journal and wrote 3 words across the top of a fresh page. No more shrinking. Then she listed things she wanted to do, not for anyone else, but for her. Plant tomatoes again. Get a new pair of walking shoes. Visit Ella in Oregon. Make a pie and eat it herself. Dance to music no one else can hear. She smiled at that last one. Sometimes, healing doesn't come with fanfare. Sometimes it comes quietly, when you choose not to answer a call, when you let yourself take up space again, when you buy flowers without needing a reason. One evening, as she stood by the well watching the sun fall behind the hills, she heard a voice behind her. "I thought you might be here." It was Harold, her lawyer. "I called," he added, "a few times." "I know," Marion said, not turning. "I didn't come for anything official, just wanted to say you were right, about not needing to explain." She looked at him, really looked. His eyes were kind, tired like hers. "I'm not hiding," she said. "I know." He sat down beside her on the grass. They didn't speak for a long time. Then Harold said softly, "I filed the papers. Ella will own the land once the final signature is done." Marion nodded. "Good. Does Trent know?" "No, and I don't plan to tell him." Harold didn't argue, just nodded. "You know, he said after a moment. Some people would call this a revenge story. Marian looked out over the field, golden and wide. Maybe, she said, but I think it's just a choosing story. And with that, she leaned back on the grass, closed her eyes, and let the earth hold her at it. Not for who she had been to others, but for who she finally remembered she was. 2 weeks later, Marian returned home, not because she missed it, but because she was ready. The train rolled in quietly, unnoticed, just as she liked it. No one stood waiting. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. Porch lights flickered, hedges untrimmed, the same wind chimes clinking across the fence. Her front door welcomed her with the same soft creak, and the scent of dried lavender still hung in the hallway. But something had changed. Not the house. Her. She unpacked slowly, no rush. She hung up her 2 dresses, placed the paperback back on the shelf next to James's old journal, and laid the ribbon-bound deed and letter to Ella inside the fireproof box. She closed it gently and slid it back beneath the coats. A final act without ceremony. That Sunday, Marian went to the grocery store. She didn't expect to see anyone, but halfway down the produce aisle, she heard it. "Oh, Mom?" It was Trent. He looked surprised, a little guilty even. Standing by the apples, Mara by his side. Marian just looked at them, neatly dressed, a cart half full of prepackaged meals, and that same little tilt in Mara's chin. Like life was something she'd already mastered. Marian gave a small smile. "Trent, we weren't sure if you were still in town." "I was out for a while," she said simply. There was a pause. Trent shifted his weight. Mara looked at the lettuce. "Well, we meant to call," Trent offered weakly. "You didn't." Another silence. Mara finally broke in. "Did you get the invitation? Trent's restaurant is reopening. We're having a dinner next month. You're welcome to come." Marian raised her brows, then gave a soft laugh. Not cruel, just tired. "I'm not sure I'm available that night." "Oh," Trent said. "Well, maybe another time?" She nodded once, then turned her cart down the next aisle. She didn't look back. That night, she made soup, from scratch. Turned on James's old vinyls, let the trumpet and saxophone fill the kitchen while she stirred. She ate by the window, candle flickering low. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't need to. She felt whole. Later that week, she received a letter, handwritten, unsteady, from Ella. "I got the papers. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought it was a mistake. But then I saw your note, and I cried. I don't know why you chose me, but I promise I'll take care of it the way you would have. I'll plant things. I'll make it grow. I'll remember it's not mine. It's yours, given in trust. Thank you for seeing me." Marian folded the letter and tucked it in her journal. Her eyes misted, but she didn't cry, not the way she used to, because this time, it wasn't pain. It was recognition. Recognition that someone, finally, saw her gift for what it was and didn't treat it like air. She sat down and wrote a short reply. "You were the only one who ever asked me what I loved. That's why. That's all." And to those watching this story right now, maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe someone once looked right through you after all the years you gave, all the ways you stayed, all the pieces of yourself you handed over without receipt. If that's you, would you tell me in the comments? What moment made you finally stop giving to those who never said thank you? You never know. Your story might be the one that helps another woman stand up from her own broken chair. A few days later, Marian walked down to the community garden. It was early spring and they were opening a new row for volunteers. No one knew her there, yet. She picked up a trowel, knelt in the dirt, and began. Someone walked by and said, "You knew." She smiled. "Kind of." "What's your name?" "Marian," she said. Just Marian. And that was enough, because for the first time in a long, long while, she wasn't anyone's mother. She wasn't a placeholder at someone else's table. She wasn't forgotten. She was simply, fully her. Spring came in slow, warm waves. Marian noticed it first in the light, the way it stretched across her living room floor, just a little longer each evening. Then in the sound, the birds louder, bolder. Even the air smelled different, like soil waking up. She had started going for walks every morning, just a few blocks. She didn't use headphones, didn't scroll through her phone, just walked. And with every step, she reclaimed a part of herself she'd forgotten how to carry. There was an older gentleman she passed most days, always watering the same patch of his garden with unnecessary precision. One morning, he waved. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. That was it, but it felt like more than it was, because nobody expected anything of her anymore. Not casseroles, not babysitting, not silent forgiveness. Back home, she opened her closet and stared at her old coats. One in particular, navy wool with silver buttons, had always been her holiday coat. The one she wore to Trent's Thanksgiving dinners, to church on Christmas Eve, to baby showers and graduations. It still fit, but she didn't want it anymore. She donated the coat, along with the heels that pinched and the purse Mara once said was a little too grandma. She kept the scarf James had bought her in Chicago, and the gloves with the hole in the thumb because they were hers, not because they looked like something someone else would approve of. That week, she made marmalade, from scratch. She hadn't done that since before James died. The whole kitchen smelled like orange zest and sugar. She sealed a few jars and left one on her neighbor's porch with a note. "Try it with toast." By the next morning, there was a note back. "Delicious. Do you take requests?" Marian smiled. She'd also started journaling every evening, not because anyone would read it, but because it helped her keep record of her own presence. One entry read, "It's strange. I gave away so much. Time, energy, money, attention, and I never felt empty until I stopped. Now I give only what I want, and I feel full." She paused after writing that, then underlined it twice. Somewhere in the background of her days, she knew Trent was growing more confused. She'd heard, through a mutual friend at church, that he'd been calling around about the Kansas property, asking if anyone knew how to reach Mom's cousin Ella. Marian didn't respond. She didn't need to. The deed had already changed hands. Quietly, legally, permanently. And with it, something inside her had changed too. She no longer felt responsible for protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. She hadn't cut Trent out of her will entirely. That would have been too easy, too final. Instead, she left him exactly one thing: the baby blanket she'd knit when he was born, folded with a note that said, "I hope one day you remember the warmth in this and not the weight of what you thought I owed." She didn't know if he'd understand. That wasn't the point. The point was, she had made the choice, and that made all the difference. That Sunday, she went to the community garden. It had become her ritual, pulling weeds, planting tomatoes, sharing stories with the other volunteers. No one asked who she used to be. They only asked what she wanted to grow. Marian liked that question. She had signed up for a watercolor class. It met every Thursday night at the rec center. She wasn't any good, not really, but she didn't care. The instructor was kind, and the paper felt good under her brush. Her sky always came out too purple. But maybe that was her thing. At the end of one class, a woman named Lydia leaned over and said, "You know, I hope when I'm your age, I do what I want without caring what anyone thinks." Marian looked at her and smiled, not out of pride, but out of recognition. "I didn't used to," she said. And that was all. That evening, she walked home in the cool spring air, her sketch pad tucked under her arm, and thought of all the years she'd spent proving her worth in silence, waiting for gratitude that never came, offering help no one even bothered to acknowledge. But now she only gave what she wanted to give, and she kept the rest, because no one else was entitled to the version of her she had worked so hard to reclaim. Back at home, she took off her shoes, lit a candle, and sat by the window. The marmalade jar still sat half full on the table. She took a spoonful, let the sweetness melt across her tongue. It was imperfect, and completely hers. It started with a knock on the door, Not loud, not urgent, just a polite, hesitant knock, like someone wasn't sure they were welcome. Marian was in the kitchen, folding towels from the dryer. She hesitated. She hadn't had visitors in weeks, the kind she wanted anyway. She opened the door, and there he was, Trent. His hair was more disheveled than usual, his shirt half tucked like he hadn't meant to dress up, but also hadn't meant to look this casual either. In his hand was a small paper bag from the bakery downtown. "Hi, Mom," he said. She waited. He didn't speak again right away. "Can I come in?" Marian stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like the house wasn't the same place he'd grown up in. And in many ways, it wasn't. The air felt different now, no longer heavy with silence and sacrifice. She set the folded towel on the kitchen table and turned to face him. "What brings you?" He held out the bag. "Scones, the cranberry ones you used to like." She took the bag without a smile. "I still do." He nodded, hands in his pockets. "Look, he began, then stopped. "I've been trying to figure out why you've been so distant, why you left that night, why you haven't come around." Marian didn't answer. She didn't need to. "So I started going back through everything. Old voicemails, emails. I even found a photo from Dad's birthday and—" He trailed off again. "You were always there. Every memory, every major moment, you were there. And I don't think I ever said thank you." She sat down. "No, Trent, you didn't." His face fell, but she didn't cushion the blow. "I was angry at first," he said. "After the dinner, Mara told me it was just a joke. She said I was being too sensitive, that you were overreacting." Marian looked up, her gaze steady. "I've spent a lifetime pretending I wasn't hurt just to make other people comfortable. I'm done with that." Trent sank into the chair across from her. "I guess I didn't realize how much I expected you to just keep showing up, keep forgiving." "You didn't realize," she repeated softly, "because I never stopped. Until now." He looked at the table, then at her. "Did you really change the deed to the land?" Marian nodded once. "Yes." "Why Ella?" he asked. "She asked me about my dreams," she said. "She saw me as a person, not a convenience." Trent didn't speak. Marian stood, walked to the cabinet, and poured herself a glass of water. She didn't offer him one. "You know," she said, "there's a difference between being useful and being loved. I think I confused the two for a long time." "I think I did too," Trent said, almost whispering. She sat again, the silence between them now fuller, not empty. "I didn't come to argue," he said. "I just wanted to understand." "I don't need you to understand," she said. "I needed you to care, and I stopped waiting for that." He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is from Mara." Marian didn't take it. "You can leave it on the table." "It's not an apology," he admitted. "It's a statement. She thinks you've turned Ella against us." Marian gave a dry chuckle. "Ella doesn't need help seeing clearly." Trent stood. "You're not going to change your mind about the land, are you?" "No," she said simply. He paused at the door. "You're different now." "I'm the same," she corrected. "You're just finally seeing me without all the layers you put on me." He left without another word. Marian watched him go. No triumph, no relief, just clarity. Later that evening, she opened the envelope Mara had sent. It was exactly what she expected. Cold, calculated, a mixture of subtle guilt and veiled accusation. As if she had robbed them of something they were entitled to. She folded it without finishing and dropped it in the trash. Instead, she opened her journal, wrote 3 sentences. "They thought I was theirs because I gave, because I stayed. They never asked if I wanted to. Now they know." Outside, the streetlights buzzed softly. A breeze lifted the curtains. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and then fell silent. Marian brewed tea. The mug was chipped, James's old favorite. She liked it that way, imperfect, familiar. She didn't need their approval anymore. She didn't crave closure. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to yell, fight, or explain. It's to reclaim your name from their mouths and say it back to yourself with peace. It wasn't a loud moment, not some dramatic confrontation or a slamming door or even a raised voice. It was the silence that made them look around and realize Marion wasn't coming back. Not this time. It started with the family dinner. Trent and Mara had invited a few business partners over, hoping to impress. The house was spotless, the wine imported, the meal catered, but something was off. There was no warmth. No one greeted guests at the door with a knowing smile or made a little homemade pie just in case. There was no thoughtful centerpiece, no place cards written in elegant script. It felt sterile. Halfway through the evening, one of the guests asked, "Is your mother joining us?" Trent forced a smile. "No, she's been keeping to herself lately." The woman smiled politely. "That's a shame. She seemed like the glue last time." That sentence sat in the room longer than the laughter that followed, because everyone knew it wasn't just a social nicety, it was the truth. Back at her own home, Marion sat on the porch in her robe, tea in hand, listening to the night breathe. She didn't need to know, that her absence was now being felt, not ignored. And that was exactly the point. She'd spent decades filling in the cracks for people who barely noticed she was holding them up. Now the cracks were beginning to show, and she wasn't patching them anymore. The next week, she visited the community center to drop off another box of donated books. The receptionist lit up. "Miss Marion, you're the one who brought those lemon bars to the library event, right?" Marion laughed softly, guilty. "We've got a little seniors writing group forming, memoirs, storytelling. They asked if someone like you might be willing to share their journey. Would you?" She blinked, caught off guard, not by the invitation, but by the feeling that followed. They weren't asking for her to help because they needed something. They were asking because they valued her voice. And to those watching this now, maybe you've been the one who always showed up, quietly made things better, never asked for recognition, but noticed when no one offered it anyway. If you've ever felt like that, have you ever stepped away just to see who noticed? Tell me in the comments. When did your absence finally speak louder than your presence ever did? That evening, Marion took the notebook she'd kept through the hardest part of the year and sat with it open on her lap. She didn't read it, just held it. Let it rest on her knees like an old friend. Her home didn't feel like a shell anymore. It felt like hers. Not a waiting room for visitors who never came, not a backup kitchen for family dinners she wasn't truly welcome at, just hers. She'd bought a new rocking chair, one with wide arms and a deep seat, not fancy, but chosen by her, for her. She placed it by the window, right where the morning light hit. Across town, Trent sat at his desk staring at an email. It was from a nonprofit. The land donation had been finalized. Ella's name was listed as the official steward. A press release had gone out with Marion's name, describing her as a quiet benefactor who had entrusted her family's land to someone who would preserve its legacy. Trent didn't reply to the email. He just stared at it, then at his phone. There were no recent calls to his mother, no new texts. He scrolled through their thread. All his messages were short, informational requests, reminders. Not one, "How are you?" Not one, "Thank you." He realized he hadn't spoken to her in person, really spoken since the night of the trash can. And now she had left the table, not in anger, in clarity, and she had taken her legacy with her. Back in her living room, Marion hummed an old tune as she flipped through a seed catalog. She didn't know what she would plant in the little raised beds by the back fence. Tomatoes, maybe, or just wildflowers. The choice was hers now, always had been. She had just forgotten. But now she remembered, and they, finally, were starting to realize what had always been true. She was never background. She was the foundation, and when she stepped away, everything tilted. The news broke quietly, just a 2-paragraph announcement in the local newsletter. No headline, no pictures, just a statement from the county. We're honored to receive a conservation easement donation for the Hartley land in Ellis Creek. It will remain protected from commercial development in perpetuity, thanks to the stewardship of Ms. Ella Chambers, who accepted the deed from longtime local Marion Hartley. That was it. But that tiny ripple reached all the way to Trent's office. He read the notice 3 times, then read it out loud as if the words would rearrange themselves into something less permanent. They didn't. His mouth went dry. That land had been in the Hartley family for 3 generations. He'd already spoken with a developer, quietly, tentatively. The plan was never set in stone, but it had felt like a sure thing, something inevitable. Now, it was gone. He called Ella. She didn't pick up. He tried again, then texted, "Call me, we need to talk." The dots appeared, then vanished, and then came the reply, "I don't think we do." That night, he came home late. Mara was on the couch, laptop open, a spreadsheet glowing across her glasses. "They're protecting the land," he said. Mara looked up. "What?" "The Ellis Creek property. Mom gave it to Ella. It's locked now. Conservation status, no resale, no building. It's over." Mara slammed the laptop shut. "That was supposed to be for us. That was the fallback plan if the restaurant didn't expand." Trent didn't respond. Mara stood. "Call her. Fix it." "I already tried." Mara stared at him. "She's doing this to punish us." Trent shook his head slowly. "No, she's doing this because she's finally done waiting for us to see her." Back in her own home, Marion made tea. She had heard about the article. Ella sent her a clipping with a little note. "They wanted me to do a photo. I told them no. This was never about us being seen. It was about you being respected." Marion smiled. She didn't feel victorious. She felt right. She folded the clipping and placed it in her journal, next to the baby blanket photo and the page she had written months ago. "I owe them nothing but honesty." And I gave it. The doorbell rang. Marion opened it to find a man in a navy suit, her old attorney, Jonathan. He looked sheepish. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, "but I wanted to deliver this in person." He handed her an envelope. Inside, a revised will. Clean, legal, final. Marion skimmed it. Everything was where she wanted it to be. A portion to the library fund, a small scholarship at the community college in James's name, the house to a young couple she'd met at the garden who'd been living out of their car last winter. And the final line, "To my son, Trent Hartley, I leave the memories he was willing to keep." Jonathan looked at her. "You sure?" Marion folded the paper. "Absolutely." He nodded and left. Later, as the sun set, Marion sat on the porch in her rocking chair. The sky turned the color of a bruise, softening into dusk. She watched the wind bend the tips of the wild grass, listened to the far-off sound of children playing on the next block, and she thought about the chair, that trash can, that night, how it hadn't been the first time she was humiliated, just the first time she stopped swallowing it. She hadn't planned revenge. She hadn't plotted anything. She just walked away. And somehow, that had done more damage than anything loud ever could. Across town, Trent stared out the window of his empty restaurant. The expansion deal had fallen through. Investors had started asking questions. And for the first time, he realized something terrifying. He didn't know how to function without the quiet cushion of his mother's support beneath everything. Not financial, not even emotional, but structural. She had been the anchor, the spine, the invisible scaffolding. And now the silence had shape, and it surrounded him. Back at home, Marion lit a candle and sat by the piano. She hadn't played in years, not since James passed. She touched the keys gently, one by one. A tune came back, not perfect, but hers. The house wasn't empty. It was full of her choices, her voice, her silence. And none of it asked permission to exist anymore. Marion never told anyone the exact day she stopped counting the time she bit her tongue, the number of unreturned calls, the hours lost waiting in rooms she was never really invited into. She just stopped. And then life got quieter. Not empty, just honest. In the weeks after the land deal was finalized and her will updated, Marion's days began to take on a rhythm of their own. She joined the storytelling group at the rec center. At first, she thought she'd just sit and listen. But on the second Thursday, when they went around the circle asking who wanted to share, she surprised even herself by raising her hand. She read a piece called "The Chair I Never Chose." The room was silent afterward. Then one woman, Diane, a retired nurse with kind eyes, said, "You didn't deserve that, you know. Any of it." Marion simply nodded. "I know that now." She wasn't looking for applause. She just needed her voice to live somewhere outside her chest. Her days became filled with little rituals. Coffee on the porch. Letters to herself she never sent. Garden gloves always dirty, always drying on the railing. She started teaching a cooking class for new moms at the community center, just once a week. Quick dinners for real days, she called it. No one asked her what happened with her son. She was grateful for that. Instead, she taught them how to make lentil stew with one pot, how to tell if your tomatoes were ready, and how to keep your own needs on the list. Even if it's near the bottom some days. One evening after class, a young mom lingered behind. "You know," she said, "I don't have a mom I can call. I haven't in a long time. But when I'm here, listening to you, it kind of feels like I do." Marion's throat caught for a second. She reached over and squeezed the girl's hand. "Then I'll see you next Thursday," she said. There was no bitterness in her anymore. Not because it had gone away, but because she'd let it compost. Turned it into something that could grow. She'd found a way to carry herself again. Not as someone waiting to be recognized, but as someone who had already given herself permission. And strangely, or maybe perfectly, that's when the first letter from Trent arrived. It came in a plain envelope, no return address. Just her name written in his handwriting. Still neat, still familiar. Inside a folded sheet of paper, no salutation, no apology. Just this. "I was raised by someone I didn't understand until too late. You were never small. I just never looked close enough. I hope you're happy. I hope you know you earned it." Marion read it once, then again. Then she folded it and placed it in her journal, behind the note from Ella and the clipping about the land. She didn't cry, she didn't call, she didn't reply. Some things don't need revisiting to be resolved. Instead, she went back to her kitchen and finished frosting the carrot cake she was bringing to the neighbor's potluck. A new family had just moved in. Young couple, 2 kids, a rescue dog with big eyes and bigger energy. She'd offered to bring dessert. That's who she was now. Not because someone expected it, but because she chose it. Later that night, the potluck buzzed with laughter and mismatched dishes. Someone brought deviled eggs that vanished in 10 minutes. The couple across the street brought their accordion. The music was bad, but joyful. Marion stood by the fence, a paper plate in hand, laughing at a toddler who kept dropping their spoon and shouting, "Uh-oh." And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel like she was missing anything. She wasn't watching someone else's life happen from the sidelines. She wasn't trying to earn space at a table. She had built a new one. And it didn't matter if Trent ever sat at it again, because Marion wasn't living for inheritance, approval, or redemption anymore. She was living for peace, for presence. And for the first time, that was enough. The letter arrived in early spring. It was hand-delivered by a courier, not in a rush, not urgent. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, with gold foil edges. Inside was an invitation. Formal, printed, as if drafted by a wedding planner. "You are cordially invited to the 20th anniversary of Hartley Family Restaurant." At the bottom, in smaller script, "We would be honored if you join us, Mother." Marion placed it gently on the counter. Then she made herself a cup of tea just as the robins began to sing outside. She didn't laugh. She didn't cry. She just looked at the envelope, then out the window, where her garden had begun to bloom again without anyone asking it to. 3 days later, the event went ahead without her. Trent and Mara stood stiffly in front of a gold banner and posed for photographers. The restaurant was packed with local politicians, investors, extended cousins. But no one brought up the land. No one dared mention the easement, or the scholarship, or the revised will. But Marion's name came up anyway. A guest whispered, "Where's your mother, Trent? I always thought she was the real heart of this place." Another added, "She was the one who made that winter soup, wasn't she? It was never the same after she left." Trent smiled, nodded politely, sipped his champagne. But in his gut, something ached. Not guilt, not anger, just emptiness, like the sound of a chair being pulled out and no one sitting down. Back at her house, Marion sat on her porch, rocking slowly. A small bird landed on the railing, bold and curious. She watched it hop, then fly off again. She hadn't gone to the celebration, not because of anger, but because she had nothing to prove. She'd already said everything she needed to say, without ever raising her voice. She had chosen Ella, not out of spite, but out of trust. She had left the chair, the table, the house, and they'd only realized how much she meant after she stopped showing up to fill the gaps. That was her quiet triumph. That was her revenge story, if you could even call it that. Because in the end, it wasn't about taking anything from them. It was about giving everything back to herself. 2 days later, she walked through the garden with a basket, collecting fresh herbs for the meal she was making. She waved to the neighbors, chatted with the postman, offered cuttings to the girl next door who wanted to start her own garden. That evening, Ella called. "They tried to reach me again," she said, slightly amused. "They will," Marion replied, slicing carrots into the pot. "That doesn't mean you have to answer." "I won't." "Good girl." They hung up after talking about tomatoes and sunflowers and the way the light fell different in the spring. As the stew simmered, Marion opened her journal one last time and wrote, "I walked out without slamming a door. I cut ties without a scene. And still, they heard it. I didn't disappear. I just stopped making myself small." She closed the book, not to forget, but because the chapter was done. And now, to you. Yes, you watching this story unfold. Have you ever left a place, a relationship, or a role so quietly that people only noticed your value after you were gone? Did your silence ever speak louder than your words? If this story stirred something in you, tell us in the comments. What was the moment you realized it was okay to walk away? Without yelling, without proving, just walking away with your peace? We'd love to hear your revenge story. Even the quiet ones, because sometimes those are the ones that change everything.